It was a quiet morning in Portland when Laura Bennett received a call from her younger sister, Amanda. Amanda sounded worried and rushed. She had accepted a new job in another state and didn't have time to help her son, Ethan, move into his new college apartment. She needed Laura to let him stay for a few weeks until he could settle things on his own. Laura, always dependable and soft-hearted, immediately said yes. Laura was in her early 40s, married for almost 15 years to Daniel, a man who had once made her laugh so easily, but now rarely looked up from his laptop. Their marriage had slowly turned into a quiet partnership, polite, predictable, and emotionally empty. They shared the same roof, but their lives moved on separate tracks. Daniel worked late hours as an accountant, and when he was home, he was often glued to his phone, answering work emails or scrolling through news. Laura didn't complain. She had grown used to the silence that filled their house. Ethan arrived one Friday evening, a tall, polite 21-year-old with a calm smile and a kind presence. He had his mother's eyes, gentle and observant, and his father's easy charm. When Laura opened the door, she felt a flicker of warmth. It had been a long time since the house felt this alive. "Thanks for letting me crash here for a bit, Aunt Laura," he said, setting his duffel bag down. "Of course," Laura replied, smiling. "Your family. Make yourself at home." From the first night, Laura noticed how different Ethan was from most people his age. He was thoughtful, respectful, and quick to help. When Daniel returned home from work late that night, Ethan stood up, shook his hand firmly, and offered to heat up dinner for him. Daniel gave a short nod, muttered a thank you, and disappeared upstairs to his office. That became a pattern. Daniel's world was filled with spreadsheets and client calls. Ethan's world was full of energy and kindness. Laura, somewhere in between, found herself drawn to the quiet warmth Ethan brought to the house. It wasn't romantic, at least not at first. It was just a reminder of how good it felt to be around someone who noticed her presence. On Saturday morning, Laura made pancakes for breakfast. Ethan joined her in the kitchen, still half asleep but smiling. He started helping her without being asked, setting the table, slicing fruit, making small jokes that made her laugh. She hadn't laughed like that in years. Daniel, as usual, skipped breakfast, leaving early for urgent work. As the days passed, Laura and Ethan developed a natural rhythm. They cooked together, took evening walks, and talked about life. Ethan told her about his classes, his plans, and how overwhelming adulthood felt sometimes. Laura shared bits of her own life, her volunteer work, her garden, and how she missed the excitement of her younger years. He listened, genuinely interested. And that attention was something she hadn't felt in so long. One evening, a soft rain began to fall, just as the power went out. Laura lit candles, filling the house with a golden glow. Ethan came down the stairs, holding a blanket over his shoulders. "Well," he said, smiling, "looks like movie night's canceled." Laura laughed, sitting on the couch. "Guess we'll just have to talk like in the old days." They sat across from each other, the rain tapping on the windows. The room felt strangely peaceful. Ethan asked her about her favorite memories, and she found herself talking about her childhood, about how she used to paint before life got busy, before she forgot what made her feel alive. Ethan listened quietly, his expression soft. "You should start painting again," he said. "You sound happiest when you talk about it." Laura felt a sudden warmth rise in her chest. It had been years since anyone encouraged her like that. "Maybe I will," she said with a small smile. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance, and for a moment, everything went silent except the rain. There was a gentle understanding in the air. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just deeply human. To people, generations apart, feeling connected through honesty and care. Later that night, Daniel came home late. He saw the candlelight in the living room and paused briefly before walking past them. Lights out again. He muttered, uninterested, and went straight upstairs. Laura watched him go, her heart tightening slightly. Ethan helped her blow out the candles before heading to bed. When she finally lay down, staring at the ceiling, she realized how distant Daniel had become, how invisible she felt in her own home. Over the next few days, Laura started noticing things she had long ignored. The empty chair across the dinner table, The way Daniel spoke more to his phone than to her. The way silence had become their only language. And how, somehow, Ethan's presence made that silence easier to bear. One afternoon, while tending to her small garden, Laura found Ethan outside, fixing a broken fence post. "You don't have to do that," she told him. He smiled. "It was loose. Figured I'd help out." She watched him work for a moment, realizing how effortlessly he filled the quiet spaces. He didn't make her feel lonely. He made her feel seen. That evening, they cooked dinner together again. It became their small ritual. He'd chop vegetables, she'd stir the pot, and they'd talk about everything from movies to family memories. There was laughter, comfort, and light, things that had been missing for too long, but underneath that warmth, Laura began to feel something confusing, a strange awareness she couldn't name. It wasn't attraction exactly, but it was something close to admiration, something deep and human. She scolded herself quietly for even feeling it. This was her nephew, and she was a married woman. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the feeling of being valued again. Still, when Daniel came home that night, he didn't even notice the warm dinner waiting or the smiles between them. He mumbled a distracted thanks and went upstairs again. Laura stood there, her heart caught between guilt and longing. Longing not for Ethan, but for the connection she once had with her husband. That night she couldn't sleep. She heard the faint sound of rain again and got up to look outside. The garden lights flickered softly, and she saw Ethan sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, lost in thought. She hesitated, then wrapped herself in a blanket and joined him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just thinking too much." They sat there quietly, watching the rain fall over the garden. It was peaceful, simple, almost healing. Ethan broke the silence. "You know, Aunt Laura, you've got this way of making people feel at ease." "I think that's a rare thing," she smiled, a little shyly. "That's a kind thing to say." Ethan turned to her, his tone sincere. "I mean, you're one of those people who make others feel like home." Laura's heart softened at his words. They were innocent, but they touched a part of her that had been asleep for too long. She looked at him, at the young man her sister had raised so well, and felt proud, grateful, and unexpectedly emotional. When she went to bed that night, she thought about what he said, about what it meant to make someone feel at home. She realized she missed that feeling herself, the warmth, the connection, the laughter. She wanted to find it again. Somehow, in the days that followed, Laura began to change little things. She started painting again, her hands shaky at first, but growing steadier with each brushstroke. She played music while cooking. She smiled more. Ethan noticed, encouraging her every step of the way. Daniel, meanwhile, remained distant, unaware of the quiet transformation happening right beside him by the end of the second week. The house felt different, brighter, warmer. Laura didn't know if it was Ethan's presence or the part of herself she had started to rediscover. But it felt good, almost like waking up after a long sleep. She didn't realize it yet. But her decision to open her home to Ethan had done something she hadn't expected. It had opened her heart, not to another person, but to the parts of herself she thought she had lost forever. And though everything still felt peaceful, something was quietly shifting beneath the surface, something that would soon test the fragile calm she had found. The days passed quickly in Laura's home, each one bringing small changes that she hadn't anticipated. Ethan had settled in easily, taking on small chores around the house, helping with laundry, cleaning, and even assisting her with cooking. He was quiet, polite, and thoughtful. But there was something about his presence that made Laura feel alive again, in a way she hadn't felt for years. She reminded herself constantly that he was family, just her nephew. But the human connection she was experiencing with him awakened emotions she hadn't confronted in a long time. One afternoon, Laura decided to take a walk through the neighborhood park. Ethan offered to join her, and she agreed, appreciating the company. The sky was clear, the sun soft on their faces, and the air smelled like fresh grass and blooming flowers. They walked side by side, chatting about Ethan's college life, his ambitions, and his fears. It was easy, natural, and comforting. Laura realized she had missed having conversations that didn't revolve around household chores or work deadlines. When they reached a small lake at the center of the park, Ethan suggested they sit on a bench. Laura noticed how easy it was to speak with him, how open, judgmental, and genuinely interested he was in her thoughts. She began to share memories she hadn't told anyone in years, how she used to dream of traveling, how she had once wanted to write a book, and how her marriage with Daniel had become something she tolerated rather than celebrated. Ethan listened quietly, his expression attentive. "You know, Aunt Laura, you're really inspiring," he said softly. "I mean it. You've kept going all these years even when things got hard. That's something most people would give up on." Laura felt a warmth spread in her chest at his words. It wasn't romantic desire, but it was a deep human appreciation, a validation she hadn't felt in years. She realized that she had been living on autopilot, always doing what was expected of her, and that Ethan's presence reminded her of who she truly was, independent, kind, and full of life. When they returned home, the sky had turned golden with the sunset. Laura felt lighter, almost as if a burden had been lifted. Ethan helped her prepare dinner, and they shared stories over the meal. Daniel came home late as usual, tired from his office work, and barely noticed the laughter that had returned to the dining room. Laura's heart swelled with a bittersweet mix of happiness and sadness. Happiness from rediscovering connection. Sadness from realizing how distant she had been from her husband. The next few days were filled with small, meaningful moments. Ethan suggested they reorganize the garage, and Laura agreed. They spent hours cleaning, sorting, and reminiscing about childhood memories. Ethan shared funny stories about his school days, and Laura laughed genuinely, feeling years of stress and monotony melt away. There was no inappropriate attraction, no crossing boundaries, but a sense of closeness that had been absent in her life for too long. One evening, sudden summer storm caused a brief power outage. Candles flickered across the living room, casting soft shadows on the walls. Laura and Ethan sat together on the couch, watching the rain streak down the windows. They talked about dreams, fears, and the unpredictability of life. Laura realized that she had been starving for genuine connection, someone who listened, understood, and didn't judge. Ethan provided that without effort, simply by being present. Daniel arrived late as usual, tired and preoccupied, and didn't notice the warmth in the room. He went straight upstairs without acknowledging the candlelight or the conversation taking place below. Laura noticed the contrast sharply. Here was her husband, her life partner. And yet her emotional needs were being met more fully by her nephew, a young man just beginning his adult life. It was a confusing realization. But she reminded herself that it was temporary and harmless, just companionship. Nothing more. Over time, Laura began to notice subtle ways Ethan's presence affected her. She found herself painting again, spending time in her garden, and playing music while cooking. Small joys that had been absent from her life returned. Ethan always noticed, praising her efforts and encouraging her. "You've got a gift," he said one afternoon, watching her brush colors across a canvas. "You shouldn't hide it." Laura smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and validation she hadn't felt in years. It was thrilling and comforting at the same time. But there was also an undercurrent of tension she couldn't ignore. Daniel remained emotionally distant, focused entirely on work. And yet she felt guilty for finding fulfillment outside her marriage, even if it was completely innocent and familial. One weekend, Laura decided to invite Ethan to a small family barbecue in their backyard. She called a few neighbors and old friends, hoping to create a lively, warm atmosphere. Ethan eagerly helped set up tables, light the grill, and arrange decorations. His energy was infectious. Guests arrived, and the party was full of laughter, conversation, and lighthearted teasing. Laura noticed how naturally Ethan connected with everyone, how his charm brought warmth to the group, and she felt proud. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Laura and Ethan sat alone in the backyard under the stars. They spoke softly, reflecting on the night and the subtle joys of connecting with others. Laura felt content, even at peace, as she realized that this simple, calm presence in her life was exactly what she needed: human connection, companionship, someone who made her feel alive again. That night, as she lay in bed, Laura reflected on the past few weeks. Her life had been transformed quietly, subtly, by the presence of someone she had welcomed as family. There was no wrongdoing, no inappropriate feelings, just a sense of being alive again, being seen, and being appreciated. She realized that happiness and fulfillment could arrive in the simplest ways: a shared meal, a laugh, a conversation in the soft glow of candlelight. Then yet, even as she embraced this newfound connection, Laura couldn't shake a small worry. Daniel remained distant, absorbed in his work, and seemingly oblivious to the changes in the household. She feared that if he noticed the bond forming between her and Ethan, he might misunderstand. But she also knew she couldn't deny the truth. Life had been empty for too long. She was finally feeling human again. The week ended with another storm, this one stronger and colder. The power flickered and went out for several hours. Laura and Ethan lit candles once again, sitting side by side in the living room. They didn't speak much, simply watching the rain and sharing comfortable silences. Laura felt gratitude for these moments, these small pieces of joy that had returned to her life. She knew that the time together was temporary, just a few weeks until Ethan settled into his new dorm. But she was determined to cherish it fully by the second week of his stay. Ethan had become an integral part of the household. He helped Daniel with minor tasks, listened to Laura's stories, and created an atmosphere of warmth and laughter that had been absent for years. Laura found herself more confident, more vibrant, and more alive. Her marriage with Daniel remained distant, but she began to understand that happiness wasn't necessarily dependent on him. It could come from unexpected, innocent connections that reminded her of her worth. One late evening, Ethan and Laura stayed up late talking about life, family, and the future. He confided in her about his college anxieties, and she shared lessons she had learned from her own life. Their conversation flowed naturally, each feeling seen and appreciated. Laura realized that these moments of connection were healing her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. It was during these quiet, intimate evenings filled with laughter, stories, and reflective conversation that Laura began to understand something crucial. Happiness could arrive unexpectedly, through relationships she hadn't anticipated, with people she didn't expect would touch her heart. Ethan was simply being himself, but in doing so, he reminded her of her own vitality, her own capacity for joy, and her own ability to connect deeply with others. And so, while Daniel continued to be absorbed in work, Laura and Ethan's bond quietly grew stronger. It was innocent, wholesome, and transformative, a reminder that human connection could heal emotional wounds, fill silences, and rekindle a sense of purpose and joy. Laura knew there were challenges ahead. Her nephew would eventually leave, and Daniel might question the closeness they shared, but she felt ready to embrace whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she had rediscovered a part of herself she had long forgotten. The storm outside subsided, leaving the house calm and quiet. Laura looked at Ethan sitting across from her and smiled softly. She realized that life could surprise her in the most unexpected ways through simple companionship, genuine care, and the quiet presence of someone who truly listened. She didn't know what the next days would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt fully alive. The final week of Ethan's stay arrived faster than Laura could have imagined. The house felt simultaneously full and empty. Full with the energy he brought, and empty with the looming thought of his departure. Each day became precious, each shared conversation or quiet moment more significant. Laura tried to savor every laugh, every detail of their routine, and every small interaction that had grown into a comforting rhythm over the past few weeks. She realized she had been living without this type of connection for far too long. Ethan had grown comfortable in the house, naturally taking on roles that made the household flow more smoothly. He would help Daniel with small repairs, organize groceries, and even make morning coffee without being asked. Laura watched him with pride and admiration, noticing how thoughtful and mature he had become over the past few weeks. She also noticed how her own confidence had returned. She moved with ease around the house, laughed more freely, and even started planning small projects for herself again. These changes were subtle but profound, making her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. One evening, thunderstorm rolled in suddenly, rattling windows and casting shadows through the house. Power flickered and went out, leaving only the dim light of candles flickering across the walls. Laura and Ethan found themselves in the living room, sitting close together, sharing a blanket for warmth. They spoke softly, reflecting on the days they had spent together, their shared memories and the simple joys that had filled the house with energy again. The conversation was comforting and grounding, a safe place amid the storm outside. "You've changed this house, Aunt Laura," Ethan said quietly, his voice almost reverent. "It's brighter, happier, and I think I've learned a lot from seeing how you handle everything." Laura smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. She appreciated his words deeply, not as a romantic gesture, but as a recognition of her worth and resilience. For years, she had felt invisible in her own life, overshadowed by routines and responsibilities. Ethan's presence had reminded her of her own vitality, her capacity to care, to connect, and to bring joy to the people around her. The storm passed, leaving a quiet stillness in the house. Laura noticed that the brief darkness had somehow made the light in the room feel warmer. The bond between her and Ethan stronger. She realized that the past weeks had allowed her to rediscover herself. She had laughed, played, shared, and even worried. And through it all, she had found a deep sense of connection that was both innocent and profoundly meaningful. The day of Ethan's departure came sooner than either of them expected. Laura woke early to prepare breakfast, trying not to let the moment overwhelm her. She set the table carefully, making his favorite dishes, and placed a small note beside his plate. "Thank you for bringing joy back into this house. We will always remember these days." Ethan entered quietly, noticing the note, and smiled softly, a mix of gratitude and nostalgia in his eyes. During breakfast, their conversation was lighthearted at first, discussing what he planned to do once back at college. But beneath the casual tone lay a layer of unspoken emotion, the realization that their daily interactions were about to change, that the household would return to its previous quietness, and that the warmth they had shared would be missing. Laura found herself holding back tears, trying to keep the morning bright and easy for him. After breakfast, they moved to the front door. Ethan picked up his bag and they exchanged a long, meaningful look. There were no inappropriate gestures, no misunderstanding, only a deep acknowledgement of what the past weeks had meant for both of them. "I'll miss this," Ethan said softly. "I'll miss how you made me feel, like I belonged." Laura's heart swelled with a mix of happiness and sadness. She nodded, finding it hard to speak through the lump in her throat. "We'll always have these memories," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "You've brought something into this house that I'll never forget." Ethan hugged her briefly, a comforting and familial embrace that spoke volumes about the bond they had formed. It was warm, reassuring, and completely appropriate. Yet it carried the weight of everything unspoken: gratitude, connection, growth, and mutual understanding. When Ethan left, the house suddenly felt quiet, almost hollow. Laura walked through the rooms, noticing the absence of his presence in ways that surprised her. The kitchen no longer smelled of coffee brewing early in the morning. The living room felt emptier without his laughter, and even the garden seemed to lack the energy he had brought to it. She realized that she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the small, meaningful ways he had filled her days with warmth and companionship. Daniel returned home later that evening, unaware of the emotional shift that had occurred in the household. He was tired, preoccupied, and focused solely on his own routines. Laura felt a pang of realization, while her marriage remained functional. Her emotional needs had been largely unmet for years. Ethan had reminded her of the depth of connection she had been missing, and she resolved to carry that awareness forward into her life in the days that followed. Laura slowly reestablished the household routines. She continued painting, gardening, and playing music, activities she had rediscovered thanks to Ethan's presence. She called friends she hadn't spoken to in months, reconnecting with her social life and sharing stories of the small joys she had experienced. Each action, each choice, was infused with the vitality and appreciation that had grown within her during Ethan's stay. Laura also reflected deeply on her marriage. She realized that connection, attention, and emotional intimacy were essential components of her happiness. While Daniel remained largely unaware of what had been missing, she understood that she could no longer suppress her own needs. Ethan had shown her that fulfillment could come in unexpected ways, and that self-awareness and emotional care were vital to her well-being. One afternoon, Laura received a message from Ethan, thanking her again for everything and sharing a few updates from his first week back at college. She responded warmly, grateful for the ongoing connection despite the physical distance. She realized that bonds didn't need to be constant or physical to have a profound impact. The memories, conversations, and shared experiences could continue to nurture her heart and spirit over time. Laura embraced her newfound sense of independence and self-worth. She took up new hobbies, strengthened her friendships, and became more attentive to the small joys in life. She had learned that happiness could emerge in subtle, unexpected ways, often through the kindness, understanding, and companionship of others. Ethan had been a catalyst for this transformation, but the lasting change belonged to her, the awareness that she could create a life rich in connection, warmth, and fulfillment. Looking back, Laura understood that the past weeks had been a turning point. Her life had shifted not because of drama or conflict, but because of the quiet, meaningful interactions that reminded her of her own vitality. She felt gratitude for Ethan's presence, for his empathy, his thoughtfulness, and the way he had reawakened a sense of life in her heart. In the end, Laura realized that love and connection could take many forms, not all of them romantic. Not all of them constant, but all of them meaningful. Ethan had come into her life unexpectedly, filled it with light, and left it with lasting warmth. She was forever changed, not by scandal or drama, but by the simple, profound power of human connection, kindness, and emotional presence. The house no longer felt hollow. It was quieter, yes, but it also carried a subtle, lingering energy, a reminder that life could be vibrant even in moments of absence, and that the bonds we form, however temporary, could leave lasting imprints on our hearts. Laura smiled, knowing she had emerged from this experience stronger, more aware, and more open to the joys life could bring. She felt ready for the future, ready to nurture connections, and ready to embrace every meaningful moment that came her way. And so, life continued, enriched by the quiet but powerful lessons of connection, understanding, and the unexpected presence of someone who reminded Laura of what it truly meant to feel alive.